Yo, what's up, chefs? It's Vinny, and allow me to welcome you to my step-by-step leveling and endgame Spark Sorceress guide. As I'm sure you saw in the intro, this guide will take you all the way from level 1 up to T15 maps, and you'll be blasting. With that being said, this video is probably going to be very long because it's going to include a lot of information to get you from level 1 up to level 15, and I'm going to be making sure to include all of the details you need. This is a bit of a complicated build to get going, so I'm going to try to make sure that I don't leave out any information that is going to be vital to your success. Of course, following the same formula as my previous guides, we do have a full gearing and trade links Google document. This is going to include everything you need to get through the campaign smoothly and efficiently. Additionally, it's also going to include helpful tips and trade links for every single item slot as you get into the end game. So that's going to be everything from your wand and focus all the way down to and including even your jewels. I've even got priority lists for some of the stats on your jewels. I've got tons of helpful information in here. I spent 2 to 3 hours plus just on the trade links Google document. So I implore you to make use of it if you're having any issues. Additionally, I did go ahead and set up a POE planner. There's not much of a guide to follow here. This is just a direct import of my character at level 86. So if you want something to try and mimic once you get to around that level, I would recommend that you make use of the POE planner. Moving on, I'm just going to really quickly go over the build rating as I usually do. For defense, I'm rating it a 4. The only reason it's not a 5 is because we do have a vulnerability to getting stunned because we are playing Chaos Inoculation. Your stun threshold is made up of your life pool, and Chaos Inoculation, of course, brings our life pool to 1. Thankfully, there is a way to itemize around this quite easily. On your jewels, you can get gain % of maximum energy shield as additional stun threshold, so if you get a couple of jewels with this stat, you'll be good to go on the stun department. With that out of the way, like I said, we are playing Chaos Inoculation, so we're immune to chaos damage, which is very nice. In addition to that, we have 3200 energy shield, 4500 mana. We are playing Mind Over Matter, so all damage is taken from mana before life. You add these two together, and we've got about 7600 life to play with, which is very, very nice. We're also resistance capped, which is very nice. All in all, we are extremely tanky. We can face tank on death explosions. It is very, very hard to die with this build. Moving on to the bossing, I'm also rating this a 4. This will go up to like a 55, 100. It's going to be through the top of the scale once we get cast on shock. Unfortunately, we don't have that yet because that would raise the budget a fair bit. But until then, it's still very good. Our damage with Archmage is very strong. We apply conductivity to the boss, combined with heightened curse and a 20% quality conductivity. That's reducing lightning resistance by about 50%. Then to pair with that, we have Orb of Storms with lightning exposure, which is another 20% reduction. Then we have 30% increased effect of that. And then finally, from our Ascendancy, we're getting another 20%. So to put this all in perspective, we're reducing enemies' resistances or bosses' resistances by like 90 to 100% at least. And all of these things go through 0 or beyond 0, to be clear. This is not like penetration. Penetration does not go beyond 0, but curses and exposure do. So if the boss has 50% resistance, we're bringing them to negative 50. So, it's very, very strong. For clear speed, this build is just absolutely insane. You run around. Once you get your weapon swap online, which I won't be covering in this guide, I'll be covering it in the next one. You run around, blink around, throw sparks on the ground. The sparks go everywhere. They kill everything. You pick up the loot. It's a good time. It's amazing. Gearing, I'm rating it a 3. Gearing is a little bit complicated. There's definitely builds that have simpler, gearing paths. There's less stats to worry about. In this build, there are like key stats you want to go for, but there are a lot of good stats. So there's going to be a lot to keep track of. Thankfully, like I said, I do have the full gearing and trade links Google document, and I put a lot of information in here, and it's going to hold your hand very, very well. Finally, the complexity of the build, extremely simple to play, extremely simple to pilot. For mapping, you run around, spam Spark. If you want to get fancy, you can use Mana Tempest and then Spark. For big bosses, you Flame Wall, Orb of Storms, Conductivity, Mana Tempest, Spark. Spark, 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 spark. Everything dies. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and quickly cover the skills. I do just want to briefly mention that I did not start this character with 0 currency. I did separate the currency that I made on my ranger from my currency tab, so that way I build up the currency on this character as I go. However, prior to making the character, I did spend about 50 to 60 Exalted Orbs to get some really nice leveling items and pre-socket my skill gems and get my support gems and stuff like that. Moving on though, for the Spark, I'm going to highly recommend you get a 20% quality Spark and 4-link it for leveling. If you can't 4-link it, that's okay, but 20% quality is very, very helpful because you'll get an additional 4 projectiles. For the supports, I'm going to recommend Arcane Tempo, Controlled Destruction, Considered Casting, and Acceleration. For Flame Wall, nothing super important here. If you want to 3-link it, you can. If not, a 2-link is more than fine, and you do not need to quality it. For the supports, you're going to want to take Spell Cascade, Fortress, and Persistence if you have that 3rd slot. For your Orb of Storms, getting quality on it helps, not mandatory though. Getting a 3-link is very helpful. Getting a 4-link is also helpful, but less mandatory. For the supports, in order of importance, I would recommend Lightning Exposure, Strip Away, then Overabundance, and then finally Font of Mana for that 4th slot if you have it. For your Conductivity, I would recommend doing 20% quality on this one as well. You only need 2 links though, Heightened Curse and Focused Curse. For your Mana Tempest, you only need 2 links, which is what it comes with. Qualitying this is very helpful, whenever you can, of course. But for your supports, Premeditation and Inspiration, even though you will be moving Inspiration out of this in the future, we'll talk about that later. Finally, for your only Spirit skill while leveling that really matters, up until you get 100 Spirit, I'm going to recommend you take Grim Feast. And then whenever you get your 60 Spirit or your second set of 30, I'm going to recommend you put Clarity in it. There's not really anything else you should worry about while leveling. If you want, you could do Grim Feast and Mana Remnants, but Mana Remnants is kind of poop, I'm going to be honest. Moving on, once you get up to 100 Spirit, you're going to drop Grim Feast and you're going to socket Archmage. A little tip here is you don't really want to do this until you have about 1.5k mana. You should be able to achieve that in the campaign. If you're not there yet, you'll probably get there when you get some more passive skills or upgrade your items, but you should definitely be there by the time you get to the end game. For your support gem, you're going to put Lightning Mastery, and a couple other things you're going to swap here is you're going to take Inspiration out of Mana Tempest, you're going to put it into Spark, you're going to be replacing Controlled Destruction with that, just to be clear, and that's all that you're going to change. Moving into the early end game, the only thing that's really going to change here is you're going to 5-link your Spark, and the last slot is going to be Persistence. You're going to be taking that out of your Flame Wall and putting it into your Spark. You can actually get a 5-link Spark for extremely cheap, about 20 to 30 Exalted on the trade website. I'll actually just show you super quick. If I go to the trade website, I'll show you how to do it just for those of you that don't know. Clear my filters. We're going to look up Spark, Gems, Show Filters. We're going to do Gem Level, Minimum. Actually, minimum doesn't matter. Gem Sockets, we'll do 5. And then you can see you've got them here for 5 Exalted, 10, 15, and more than likely you'll very confidently be able to get one for 20 Exalted. That's how much I got mine for. So very, very cheap. 30 Exalted or less for that 5-link Spark. Really quickly, before we move on to the passives, I do just want to give a couple of tips for the skills. Early on in the campaign, I'm going to recommend you use Flame Wall before Spark for just about everything, including just regular trash mobs. The added fire damage is going to make a pretty big difference. As you get more damage though and become a higher level, you don't need to use Flame Wall much at all except for bosses. Another thing I'll say is Mana Tempest. Something you want to keep in mind is one of the easiest ways to die with this build is sitting in your Mana Tempest too long, draining your mana all the way to 0, then getting stunned or just taking a lot of damage at once, which drains all of your energy shield. And because you have no mana, any damage you take after that will go straight to your 1 life and kill you. So just make sure when you're using Mana Tempest, you drop it, cast like 5 to 10 sparks. When you start to see your mana drain really quickly, move out of it, let your mana regen back up super quick, and then repeat that process. Mana Tempest has a very short cooldown, so you can do this very frequently throughout a map if you need to. Same with Flame Wall though, as you get more damage, eventually you should only be using Mana Tempest for rares or bosses. Additionally, I talked about this a little bit in the build rating, but the combination of your Conductivity and Orb of Storm's lightning exposure is extremely strong. Paired with our Ascendancy, you can reduce enemy resistances by about 100% plus, especially with some, crazier stuff we'll talk about in the next guide. But this does go beyond 0 resistance, so if you have any, if you're struggling with a strong rare or any bosses, make sure you're using Conductivity and Orb of Storms. Moving on, let's go ahead and quickly go over the passive trees. If you come over here, you can see I have 2 different setups, one for your leveling route, and then one for a level 78 plus swap, which will involve a pretty big respec, but it'll definitely be worth your time. For the leveling route, the first thing we're going to be doing is rushing up here to get Touch the Arcane and grabbing all of the juicy nodes on the way. So you'll see it looks something like this. We're going to grab all of this damage, grab these good nodes, all natural, and breaking point. And then ultimately we're going to come over here, grab these nodes as well, and then we're going to grab Touch the Arcane. Then we're going to grab a Jewel Socket. And the reason why Touch the Arcane and these small nodes are so important is because it's going to give you a total of 70% increased effective Arcane Surge on you. You might be saying, well, Vinny, how do I get Arcane Surge? That's where your first 2 Ascendancy points come in. You're going to be getting Arcane Surge at all times. I actually paid for an Ascendancy carry on this character. Cost me about 35 Exalted Orbs to get all 8 of my Ascendancy points. I'll leave a link to the Forbidden Trove Discord in the description. You can join that Discord. Obviously, it's not my Discord, but you can join it. You can pay about 35 to 40 Exalted Orbs. It'll take 1 to 2 minutes of your time, and somebody will carry you to get all 8 Ascendancy points. And this is not against the rules, just to be clear. This is endorsed by GGG. So we fill in our Ascendancy points. If you don't want to pay for a carry, the order I would recommend getting them in would be Constant Gale, then Strike Twice, then Force of Will, and then finally Scouring Winds. After that, we're going to grab Chronomancy for increased skill effect duration. We're going to come down here, grab some cast speed and some mana regeneration rate. We're going to grab some extra energy shield and also gain % of maximum energy shield as additional stun threshold. This is the stat I talked about earlier that will help you if you have any issues with getting stunned. After that, we're going to path up here, grab this Jewel Socket, then we're going to connect this way, and we're going to do a small respec. We're just going to get rid of all of this stuff right here. Although these nodes are good, they're not optimal. Something to point out here is that increased damage, increased spell damage, increased lightning damage, all of these things are better early on. They get worse as you get more gear and start to get more levels. With that respec, the extra points, that we saved by not getting this stuff, we're going to come up here, grab this Jewel Socket, and potentially the best node in the game. At the very least, probably the best node for this build is Pure Power. Increased lightning damage per 10 intelligence, and we're going to have a lot of intelligence. After that, we're going to slide over here, grab this Jewel Socket, and we're going to grab Branching Bolts. In combination with these 2 small nodes, this is going to give us a 100% chance for our lightning skills to chain an additional time. What that means is whenever your spark connects with an enemy, it's going to automatically redirect to another enemy and do damage to both of them. So this is going to be very, very good for your clear. I would say it's not mandatory, but for me personally, I would not get rid of it. After that, we're going to slide over here. We're going to get this increased skill effect duration. We're going to keep coming down. We're going to grab increased projectile speed for skills. This is something I'd recommend you test just to see how nice it is. Get rid of these 3 nodes, cast like 10 sparks in your hideout, then put them back on, cast 10 more sparks. You'll see how much quicker the sparks move. It's very, very good quality of life, and this will help with your sparks going off screen and killing things that you can't even see. After that, we're going to grab this Intelligence and Patient Barrier. Then we're going to grab the Jewel Socket because it's super close. After that, we're going to come down and grab this increased mana. Where do we go after that? Oh yeah, Up here, we're going to grab increased chance to shock and magnitude of shock. Magnitude of shock, very, very good stat. This is going to be one of the best things you can get to increase your damage, especially as you get deeper into the game. For this build, to be specific. After that, we're going to come up here getting Arcane Intensity. By this point, you should have a pretty good amount of mana, so that increased spell damage per 100 max mana is going to be really good, and your mana is only going to continue to go up as you get more upgrades. Eventually, you can get to the point where you have like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 mana, depending on your budget, and this will continue to get better and better and better. And this also scales alongside your Archmage, which is also, of course, getting better for each 100 maximum mana you have. After that, we're just going to fill in all of these nodes nearby, so we're going to get more increased maximum mana, we're going to get more mana regeneration, we're going to connect this way, and this will come into play later. After that, we're going to come down here, grab this increased energy shield recharge rate, and more importantly, the faster start of energy shield recharge. After that, we're going to sneakily come over here and grab Storm Charged. The reason why we took so long to get this, I think I mentioned it earlier, but we're playing Controlled Destruction on our Spark, which says we can't crit, but around this time you should be making that swap to Archmage, getting rid of Controlled Destruction on your Spark, putting Inspiration there instead, so you can start critting, and Storm Charged is going to be quite nice. After that, come down here, grab the Jewel Socket, and then finally grab these 4 nodes for the increased maximum mana and a bunch of nice energy shield to go along with it. At this point, at 101 points, you should be level 78. I'm going to recommend you hop over to the level 78 plus Respec. Once you do that, just press the back button a couple times. Once you get to this point, right before the Respec, everything will be the exact same as it was on the leveling route. Then you're going to have the Respec. So this is a pretty big Respec, so I'm going to try and go over the main sections just to make it a bit easier. The things we're going to be getting rid of are, firstly, this whole section right here. As I said earlier, increased damage is better earlier on in the game, but ultimately the way we're scaling the damage of this build is actually by scaling everything around our Spark. What I mean by that is scaling your Archmage, scaling your Arcane Intensity, scaling the magnitude of your 2 shocks. These types of things are going to be much better than actually directly scaling the damage of your Spark, which is why dropping these increased spell damage and lightning damage nodes is actually going to be valuable for us, because that's only really increasing the flat damage of our Spark, which, like I said, is not the best way to ultimately scale your damage. Additionally, we're going to be getting rid of this skill effect duration node, or these nodes up here. This is something you can test in your hideout as well. From my experience and in my opinion, I think there are better ways to use these 3 points, but to each their own. We will also be getting rid of these increased shock and shock magnitude nodes, and I know I said these are very good. We are going to be getting these, but just a bit later. You won't be getting them by the time we're done with this tree, but by around level 92, you should have these nodes back. So what we're getting to replace all of that stuff, well, let me go over it. The first 3 main things are going to be 3 keystones. They're going to be Mind Over Matter, Eldritch Battery, and Chaos Inoculation. Let me give a little bit of explanation to these. So Mind Over Matter is going to make all of the damage you take come from your mana before life. However, this will not be before your energy shield. So the order of operations will be your energy shield goes away first, then your mana. Something to just keep in mind there. You will also be getting a lot of less mana recovery rate, but that shouldn't be too big of an issue as long as you set your passive tree up this way and get a good amount of mana regen on your gear. Eldritch Battery says converts all energy shield to mana. So you might be thinking, well, is that going to mean I'm at 0 energy shield? You weren't at 0 energy shield. And no, it's not, because of this amulet. This amulet, you can see the bottom stat, says gain % of maximum mana as extra maximum energy shield. So the way this works is, even though this says converts all energy shield to mana, you're actually going to be converting like all of the flat energy shield on your gear and all of that stuff directly to your mana. But all of the mana on your gear is going to be slightly converted to your energy shield. So this is kind of a complicated conversion, but you sort of have to just trust it a little bit, Try it out, and trust me, it's very, very good. Finally, Chaos Inoculation, super strong node. We don't scale our life at all with this build, so reducing it to 1 doesn't hurt too much. Making us immune to chaos damage is very, very solid. Additionally, outside of those 3 nodes, because we are no longer taking controlled destruction as a support on your spark, you can start to get crit chance stuff. So one of those sections is going to be right here. These are all going to give you nice crit chance bonuses for your spells. Additionally, we're going to path down here, grab this jewel socket, and we're going to start filling out this little section. We don't have it fully filled out yet, but trust me, that's coming. And then additionally, we're going to grab these 3 nodes as well, which is also more crit chance and increased cast speed if you've dealt a critical hit recently. So at this point, you should still be level 78, and the rest of this is going to take you up to level 86. So we're obviously going to fill out the rest of these nodes because these are insanely good nodes. I've used them in all 3 of my builds. I think they are, if you're anywhere near them and you're playing a crit build, I mean, these are just some of the best nodes on the tree. After that, for your next 4 points, you're just going to casually fill in this little section, which is going to give you 9 plus 16, 25% increased cast speed if you've dealt a critical hit recently, and it's going to give you 10% reduced critical hit chance. Not to be confused with 10% less critical hit chance. This will not reduce your overall crit chance by 10%. It's only going to reduce your crit chance by like 1%. And finally, let's go ahead and go over the gear. As you can see, I have 3 different sections here: early leveling, rest of the campaign, and a level 78 import. All 3 of these are actually imports of my character at different points of the playthrough though, so all of these items are realistic and should be obtainable. Starting off with the early leveling, the first thing and the most important thing is going to be your amulet. This is actually something that you will pretty much use for the entirety of this build. The first time you would even consider upgrading it would be like a 40 divine plus rare necklace. Most people aren't going to get that far, even I probably will not. So it's only going to cost you about 30 to 50 exalted orbs to get one like this. I recommend you pay attention to the trade link in the Google document for this. You want to get one with a high 3rd stat that gain percent of maximum mana as extra maximum energy shield. I'd recommend like 28% or above, and you can get that for about 30 to 50 exalted. You can use it starting at level 1 all the way for the rest of the game. Moving on to the belt, this is another one that you'll be using for a very long time. The first realistic upgrade to this would be Ingenuity, which is going to be relatively expensive as well. This is going to cost you about 1 to 5 exalted. You can use it from level 1, so why not just get it early? The other uniques are just traditional, regular leveling uniques: Crown of the Victor, Foxshade, Luminous Pace, or Wanderlust. I've included trade links for all 5 of these uniques in the Google document. Moving on to the rings, the only real important things to think of here early on is going to be like cast speed, increased mana regeneration rate, increased maximum mana, attributes doesn't hurt. There's not too many crazy things to worry about here, but the priority one would probably be cast speed if I had to pick one. Actually, it would definitely be cast speed. Also, resistances are good. Moving on to your wand and focus, these are going to be very similar stats, but for your wand, you're going to want to make sure throughout the campaign and even into the end game, the number 1 priority stat is going to be plus to level of all lightning spell skills. This will increase as the item level of the wand increases, so early on, you're only going to be able to get plus 1 level. At around level 20 to 25, you can get plus 2. Around level 50, you can get plus 3. And eventually you can even get plus 4 and plus 5, but plus 4 and plus 5 are going to be pretty expensive. So even up to level 86 or whatever, you're only really going to get a plus 3 one unless you want to ball out and spend a lot of currency. Outside of getting your plus levels, other valuable things here, kind of in a somewhat loose priority list, would be cast speed and maximum mana. All 3 of those, maximum mana, cast speed, and plus levels, are very, very good. After that, getting increased mana regeneration rate, increased damage, so that's either going to be spell damage, lightning damage, or gain percent of damage as extra lightning, cold, or fire, but those are kind of below all of the things I already said. Similarly, for your focus, getting +1 to level of all spell skills is going to be very nice, but as you get higher level and start getting better focuses, that stat can be very expensive, so it becomes a little bit like you don't need to worry about it quite as much. You really want to focus on getting cast speed, maximum mana, mana regen, increased damage. Those are going to be very, very good for a low budget. If you have a really, really high budget, you can get all of those things and plus level of all spell skills though. Moving on to the rest of the campaign, the only really thing we change is we're going to be getting a Kotoko's Current. This is mainly good for the campaign. I don't think it's that good for the end game, but during the campaign, this trivializes everything. You'll be stunning everything on your screen, so you don't have to. You can literally play the game with your eyes closed. I did it at one point, and it's very, very nice for that. Eventually, you'll want to upgrade your Wanderlust to a pair of rare boots once you can get, the same amount of movement speed and some extra stats like mana, resistances. The main things to worry about here would be movement speed, mana, and resistances. Everything else is kind of whatever. Eventually, you should upgrade your rings. This isn't like a physical build. You don't need to upgrade your rings as much. You're going to be looking for the same types of stats. Priority ones would be cast speed, maximum mana, resistances, and mana regen. Increased lightning damage definitely helps, but is certainly not mandatory or as good as those other stats that I mentioned. And your wand and focus are going to be looking for the same stats, just higher versions of them. Something I'll just briefly go over here, if you go to the Google and Trade Links or the Gearing and Trade Links document, I explain it all here, but I know some people don't like to read, so I thought I would just go over it here. If you open the wand link, or actually we'll do it with a staff. If you open the link, what you'll notice if you show filters is I have the level requirement set to 15, and I have this nice weighted sum filter and count filter set up, and the weighted sum is set to 250. So if you hit search, you'll find staffs that are going to be good for level 1 to 15, or they'll have a level requirement of level 1 to 15. And they'll be pretty good staffs. You can see this one here is very, very nice for 5 Exalted. It's got all the things I was talking about: cast speed, plus levels, mana, spell damage, gain damage. And I'll just briefly say, while leveling in the campaign, using a staff is fine, and it's probably even going to be easier to find a good staff than a wand and a focus. As you get into the end game, you should go wand focus though, not staff. The thing I really wanted to point out here, though, is instead of making multiple trade filters, I made it to where you can just use the same one for different parts of the campaign. So let's say you're level 30 and you want to grab an upgrade. Just change the level requirement or the max level requirement to 30. Up this, pick like a random number. Just go up by like 50, hit search, see what happens with the results. 59 results. Okay, that's pretty good. Then you can just sort by the sum again, and boom, here's one for level 22. It's very similar, but it's just got better stats. Same as the ones below. Let's say you're level 50, you want to get a new weapon, change the level requirement to 50. Let's up this to 400, see what happens. If there's too many results, okay, there's 385. Let's go up a little bit more. Let's try 450. 359, let's do 600, just see what happens. 173 matched. Sheesh, let's do 700. Okay, 83 results, that's not bad, that's not too many. Now we'll sort by sum again. Of course, if you want, you can mess with the max price filter, but for the leveling campaign, I just recommend leaving it at 5. Don't think it's worth spending that much currency in the campaign. The campaign's pretty easy. And here you are, you've got a really nice staff for level 36. This is going to be, in theory, the best one up to level 50 based on the filters I've got set up, and I would kind of trust the filters. This has increased spell damage, lightning damage, max mana, plus levels, cast speed, mana regeneration rate. This has everything you need. If you want, you can also set this listed time to up to a week ago, because as you can see, this one was listed 23 days ago. Might not be available. Then we'll resort, and you can see you've still got really good ones here. All of these are going to be really nice, and this way you can use the same filter for different levels. Moving on though, let's go back to our guide. For the rest of the campaign, we talked about Kotoko's, we talked about the weapon, we talked about the rings, we talked about the boots, and that's going to be everything for the rest of the campaign. Same thing with the staff you can do with the focus if you want to go a wand and a focus. Moving on to the level 78 import. Something important to note is once you get into the end game, The level 65 to 75 area is a bit annoying. I wouldn't recommend spending much currency at that time, because once you get to 75 and 78 around there, you should be able to wear pretty much all items in the game. So you'll have access to a lot better deals. So I'd recommend waiting to like splurge your currency until about level 78 if you can. And if you need upgrades before then, just get small ones for really cheap prices. Once you get to level 78 though, you should start making some big upgrades, which is where you should really find a lot of value from these early end game trade links that I have. But don't let that fool you. You can use these starting at level 65. Just make sure, for example, if I open this one, just make sure you open the filter and you set this level requirement down to whatever level you are. If you're 65, set it to 65. And you can just hit search and it'll still be good. If it does something like this where it shows only one result, what that means is you need to come up here to the weighted sum and just lower it. So I lower it from 1100 to 1000, only 6 results. Let's do 800. And there you go, you got 66 results. Hopefully that makes sense. A brief explanation of what this is the weight is multiplying the number of that stat. So you can see level of all lightning spell skills has a weight of 150. This has +3, so that's 450 added to this sum, and it's doing that for all of these stats. That's why when you sort by this sum, you'll find the best combination of these stats. Generally speaking though, the stats you're looking for in the end game are going to be pretty similar to the ones you're looking for in the early game, but just more of them and a bit more precise. Something I did set up here at the top of the early end game section is some good general stats, so when in doubt, just come back and reference this. You want max mana and high ES on almost all of your gear. Of course, resistance capped, cast speed is one of your best stats. You want mana regen up to the point to where you're either out sustaining the cost of your spark or at least close to it. So you can see if I spam my spark, I'm not quite there yet, but I'm pretty close, especially if I use my mana flask, even though the mana flask isn't that helpful because we just have so much mana and such a high cost. In addition to that, intelligence, because this results in more mana. Crit chance and crit damage are 2 stats that we're not looking for in the early game, but we are looking in the end game though. So to give a little bit more detail, this is a direct import of my character, so I'll just hop in game and go over some of my gear, and I'll try and highlight some of what I think to be the best stats on each piece are. For your wand, best stat 100% is going to be the plus level of all lightning spell skills. After that, the other 2 stats that you really can't live without in my opinion are going to be increased cast speed and maximum mana, and you want all 3 of these to be pretty much as high as possible within your budget. One thing to note here is if you have to, like if there's a really, really good wand without cast speed, you can get it. However, if you don't have cast speed on your wand, you almost certainly need to have cast speed on your focus and both of your rings. So you can kind of play around with that a little bit if you want. Outside of that, other really good stats, on my wand in particular, is the increased critical hit chance for spells, increased lightning damage, and the gain damage is okay. I got this wand for 30 exalted orbs, and you should be able to get something pretty similar. Other good stats that you could get that my wand doesn't have would be mana regen, intelligence, increased spell damage. I would say like the priority stats though for sure are going to be the plus levels, cast speed, maximum mana, and then after that it would be crit chance or crit damage, then mana regen, and then all of the other like increased damage stuff is at the bottom of the totem pole. Not bad, but not as good as the ones that I previously listed. For the focus, and I actually have a notepad here for the price of all of my items, so you can see I got all of this stuff for around 2 to 3 divines. I set up the trade links to be a bit cheaper though, so you should be able to get everything from the trade links for about 1 to 2 divines. Of course, if you have more currency to spend, feel free to change the max price and then just change the minimum amount of the weighted sum filter like I talked about earlier. Moving on to the focus, I also got this one for 30 exalted. The best stats you can really get here are going to be the plus to all level of spell skills. We don't have it because it is a pretty expensive stat. Beyond that though, and if you're on a low budget, you shouldn't worry about that because if you try and get one with that, it's probably going to have bad other stats. Outside of that, though, some of the best stats are going to be the increased cast speed, max mana, same as the wand. Mana regen is going to be really good, of course. Crit chance, crit damage, also really good. And then finally, all of the random increases to damage, whether that's spell damage, lightning damage, etc. Once again, at the bottom of the totem pole, but still good. Moving on to our left ring, this one's around 150 exalted to 1 divine. For the rings in general, sorry, I accidentally banged my mic. For the rings in general, the best stats you're going to be getting are going to be maximum mana. You'll notice a theme. Maximum mana is like a mandatory stat on pretty much all of your items. But maximum mana, increased cast speed, increased mana regeneration rate are some of the best stats you can get. Beyond that, resistances. You don't want to crutch on your rings for resistances, though, if you can help it. Also, increased lightning damage doesn't hurt. And those are really the main things you're looking for. Rarity of items found, also nice, but I'm actually not focusing on it too much for this character because I have some different ideas for making currency other than mapping. For our other ring, it's a lot of the same. The only thing we're missing on this ring is increased mana regeneration rate. Another good stat, which I didn't mention over here, is you can get intelligence. This ring does have intelligence because, like I said before, that leads to more max mana, which is great. But we are missing mana regen on this ring, which is kind of sad, but we needed the fire resistance, so, you gotta do what you gotta do. And I got this ring for 120 exalted. I do also just want to say, as you can see here on the notepad, I got all of these items on stream. I even included timestamps for some of these items. So, if you don't believe me on the price, at that point, that's up to you. I do try to say when I feel like I get items for a steal, but I've got, as much proof as I can for the prices of these items. And I feel like the trade links should be proof enough because you can find the items with the trade links and the max price is set to like 50 or 100 exalted orbs. Moving on though to the helmet, we got this one for 4 exalted orbs. A lot of the same. You really need that high maximum mana. When we upgrade this one, we're going to get a lot more, like 150 plus. But the other good stats here is obviously a high base energy shield at 331. Another thing we would want to upgrade up to like 350 plus probably. The other good stats though here is intelligence. The resistances are really nice. If you don't need the resistances, you can get increased critical hit chance or rarity of items found. But chances are you're probably going to need the resistances unless you have some really crazy gear. So something similar to this will do really good for you. After that, we have the chest piece. We got this one for 200 exalted orbs, but we do actually have one in our stash here that we were using for a very long time that we got for 5 exalted orbs. This is one of those things I talked about earlier where like between 65 and 75, you don't want to spend too much currency. You can still get some okay stuff. We got this one for 5. It's got good resistances, good energy shield, etc. But back to the one we're currently wearing. Like I said, this one was 200. The nice thing about it is it has a good implicit of 50% increased mana regeneration rate. So I'm a big fan of the Keth Raiment implicit. There are other good implicits, though, that I include in the trade links. Outside of that, you want high base energy shield. For the suffixes, you want resistances or intelligence. There's probably a couple of other good things that you could get on this. If there are, I know I included them in the trade link. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. The main thing you're looking for, though, is high energy shield, good resistances, and that's pretty much it for your chest piece, to be honest. Moving on to the gloves, we did swap out of the Kotoko gloves into the Endgame. Honestly, you're going to get a lot more bang from your buck out of rare gloves, in my opinion. The Kotokos are really nice for the campaign, but they do reduce your cast speed by 10%. They don't give you any resistances, so I think you should definitely upgrade them. But that is kind of personal preference. Some people like being able to electrocute everything, but if you're one-shotting everything, electrocuting everything doesn't really do you that much good. With that being said, once again, you want high max mana. For your suffixes, you're going to want resistances, and if you can fit it in, critical damage bonus is a nice stat, but it's going to be a bit more expensive. We paid 100 exalted orbs for these. You can get really good gloves for like 20 exalted if you forego the critical damage bonus. You can just get more resistances there. After that, we have the boots. We got these for 30 exalted orbs. A lot of the same. You want high base energy shield, high maximum mana, and then high resistances. Additional stats you could be looking for are intelligence, rarity of items found, and that's kind of about it. When we upgrade these, we're definitely going to get more mana and more energy shield and maybe more resistances, but those will be pretty expensive, of course. And then obviously you do want increased movement speed as well. That kind of goes without saying at this point. The amulet, we're still using the same exact amulet as we started the game with at level 1, the Everlasting Gaze, and same thing with the belt. Hopefully that covers the gear. If you have any questions after watching this, I'm sure they will be answered in the Google document. If they're not answered there and they're not answered here, then chances are they don't exist. I've done a lot of effort. I've put in a lot of effort to make sure I tried to make the gearing process as easy to digest and simple as possible while also covering all of the bases. Actually, now that I'm saying that, I do remember one thing, which is going to be our jewels. So let's swap back over to the max roll planner and we'll look at our jewels real quick. Of course, we do have a trade link for the jewels and we have a lot of information on the jewels in the Google document, but I do want to go over them as well. So, there's a lot of stats that can be good on your jewels. Actually, if we open the link, I'll just show you really quick. This filter has a lot of stats. As you can see, I'm not going to count this, but this is like 15 different good stats. So what I did is I included a priority list of like some of the best ones just to help you find like good combos on your jewels. Something you do want to keep in mind though is, like I said at the very beginning of this video, you're going to want to make sure you get gain % of maximum energy shield as additional stun threshold on a plethora of these. You can do the math and just calculate. Like I would say you want to have roughly 50% or more of maximum energy shield as additional stun threshold, maybe even more than that. This is something you'll want to play around with. If you feel like you're getting stunned a lot, it's because you need more of this stat. If you're not getting stunned, that means you've got enough. Outside of that stat though, and that stat's pretty nice because it's very easy to find jewels with 3 good stats plus that one. That one doesn't seem to raise the price of the jewels that much. I don't know if it's because people just don't know the value of the stat. It's not like immediately obvious as a good stat, so it doesn't usually raise the price. Outside of that, I'll just look at the priority list I've got here. Recover % mana on kill. This is definitely going to be the best stat you can find, kind of. Like, you don't want to get it on every jewel, realistically, but getting this on a couple of jewels is extremely nice, but extremely expensive. I don't have any jewels with this stat. It is not required, but if you happen to find one with it for a cheap price, definitely grab it, or if you've got a super high budget, grab 2-3 of them, and it's going to be very, very helpful. Beyond that, the best way to scale your damage, even though it won't show up in the tooltip in game, like it's not going to increase your tooltip spark damage, it will increase your damage on POB, but it won't increase it in the tooltip in game, is going to be magnitude of shock or magnitude of ailments. Because you're applying 2 shocks to enemies, increasing the magnitude of that is it's hard to explain how valuable it is, but like you can end up having 2 shocks with 50% magnitude, and the thing you're doing damage to is taking 100% more damage, which, you know, hopefully that makes sense why that's extremely strong, but it's very, very good. I currently have like 3 or 4 jewels with either magnitude of shock or magnitude of ailments you inflict on it. It's a very, very good stat. After that, cast speed, similar to your wand focus rings. Cast speed, always great. We'll never turn it down, so it's high on the priority list. Critical hit chance, more valuable than critical damage bonus for this build because it's kind of hard to get crit chance, so where we can get it is very good. Percent increased maximum energy shield definitely does not hurt. Once again, here we have this gain % of maximum energy shield as additional stun threshold. You're going to need a few of these. Increased skill effect duration is quite nice because we do end up getting rid of this section up here in lieu of getting, and instead we get some other stuff on the tree. So getting some of that back via skill or jewels is quite nice. This is going to increase the duration at which your sparks stay on the ground, so you can, you know, flood the arena with sparks if you have more skill duration. In addition to that, faster start of energy shield recharge. This is really good. There are some ways to get this on your passive tree, like we do have this one over here. You could also take this node, but my thought process is to forego taking this node and get that stat via jewels. And then finally, everything else in the weighted sum is going to be really good, but probably just not quite as good as these. But it does depend on your current setup. If you're really lacking damage, like your damage just feels terrible, then potentially getting more elemental damage or more projectile damage or spell damage or lightning damage could help you. Although it's not the best way to scale your damage, it might help you. For the most part, though, I would definitely probably recommend sticking with this priority list. One thing I didn't put on here, which actually I will include now, is critical damage bonus. This, honestly, if your damage feels lacking, getting this would all be super helpful. Probably the best ways to scale your damage would be better than elemental damage, projectile damage, and stuff. But this weighted sum is set up so that way you can find the best combination of stats within your budget. And the filter has a max price of 25 exalted orbs per jewel, but make sure to play around with that if you have a higher or lower budget. With that being covered, though, I think that's going to be everything I can think of to discuss to get you from level 1 all the way up to T15 maps. I apologize for the length of this video, but this was a ton of information to try and convey all in one video, which of course is why we had to clump some of it into the trade links document, the planner, the POB planner, the max roll planner. Links for all that stuff can be found in the description below. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoy the build. I've been having an absolute blast for it, or with it. I've had a lot of people ask me, do you like this more than your Monk and Ranger? I can confidently say that currently I do. It's my favorite build I've played so far. So, hope you guys have fun. Good luck blasting. And last but not least, take it easy, chefs. As you fade away, as you fade away.